Thank you. Okay. Great. I'm going to talk a bit about the 3DX workflow at Zaha on architectural projects. Cristiano introduced our kind of first pilot project, the Dongju Bridge, which is a civil project and has a quite different workflow than what we typically do in architecture, obviously. So, yeah, we have quite a history of using CATIA in the office, particularly digital project. Come from a background of using CATIA and DP with Cristiano many years back at Gehry's office. And we've been, over the years, evolving how we work and how we design and what our role is as architects in the delivery of our work and the realization of these ideas. I tend to spend a lot of effort focusing on design, right? I tend to steer away from BIM and all that stuff, what BIM means. It's more about, like we said earlier, getting on with business as usual. And I've always been an advocate for using different technologies and tools to promote design. So the 3DEXPERIENCE platform is, we've been using it for, personally, myself and the team for about 3-4 months now, right? And it's a completely different kind of way of working than we're used to with the file-based way and 3D parametric modeling application of the CATIA V5, right? So the CATIA V5 platform is a pretty fantastic parametric modeler. And it's actually now sits on top of this whole new platform of collaboration on the 3DX platform. The learning curve is a bit steep, to be honest, because the way we work is all in the cloud, and the file-based system we're accustomed to just doesn't really exist anymore, right? So we tend to find ourselves always going back to the web browser. That was kind of the biggest kind of learning curve in terms of this process, is not searching for files, not working off of the server, but always going to the web browser and beginning your work every day online. So we're going to showcase a few projects that are actually CATIA V5 DP projects as kind of case studies and kind of imagine how they would be on the platform. We have a few few projects that are ongoing now that we can't really talk about, so we won't show much of that stuff, but we will talk about the process and the implications the 3DX platform has on how we practice and do design in the office. So hence the Google. We're always starting with the Google. This is a good practice. Logging in, right? This is something fundamentally we just had to overcome. It was just not just to get in the habit of always going online, logging in, and dealing with your files. So then you open it up, and you pretty much it looks like Facebook, right? You've got this whole collaborative environment here with your latest news and your latest feeds, et cetera. And I'm going to skip a little bit past that. And then we move into the 3D modeling app. So we're going to call up one of our projects online, which is the West 28th project in New York City, which is done in V5, the facade. Part of how we work in the office is aggregating a lot of different platforms, right? We have a range of people in the office that are experienced in different tools and different ways of designing, and therefore we don't really have one centralized platform, right? And to kind of unravel a little bit of how the BIM ideology works is having a centralized platform for the aggregation of data that everyone can go to. In reality, it's not that common that everyone works on just one platform, right? So as users, we use as designers, we use what platform is best for us, right? So in this case, we're going to see our New York project here as datum geometry imported into 3DEXPERIENCE and kind of walk through that project. So if you guys don't know this project, it's on the High Line in New York, and it's a residential project with about 39 units. And it's a kind of traditional US AIA project. You know, we talked about IPD, and this is kind of a similar kind of process for having an early involvement and a collaboration with all the stakeholders kind of early on. In this case, we had the client mandated that we have a design assist with a series of potential facade contractors, and they all threw in some ideas and built mock-ups on how they would realize this idea. You know, the advantage of something like that is that, you know, the client puts a little bit of money up front, that you work closely with a series of contractors and engineers, and then, you know, in the end, you kind of, in the beginning, you work out that whole process in advance and save some money downstream. So in this way, we worked quite closely with the engineers and fabricators early on to determine what the kind of limitations we had to our design shape, right? So for you, those who are not familiar with CATIA and stuff, so this is a digital project. We work with a series of kind of smart components or UDFs and features, and then we essentially define that locally, and then we deploy these, you know, throughout the rest of the project, right? So there's a kind of idea of having a lot of reusable content in the work that you do, and gives one a kind of opportunity to always work directly with the fabricator in the realization of the design via the limitations of what they can build. So, a few animations. So this is actually a final render of the CATIA model, right? So you can get an idea of the level of intricacy is in the 3D model and how that looks. For those of you that have been to the High Line and have seen the project, it looks very similar, right? If not exactly the same in a lot of respects. This was particularly interesting because we didn't have a lot of facade to work with, right? We had a build up from about 14 inches, 16 inches from the face of glass to design the rain screen, right? I'm just gonna kind of skip through this pretty quickly about, going back to Google, going online, and then looking at another case study, which is another project of ours in Melbourne. It's another residential project. It has a similar language, and this is us familiarizing ourselves with the 3DX platform and trying to get in the habit of working online. And so importing files, querying your files by name, not having to go to a server or a local drive. And so where does this fit in between? This is kind of like, I guess this is BIM, the ambitions is BIM level 3. What we saw with digital project is a bit more kind of BIM level 2 plus, at least what we did with some of the digital project software and some of the tools developed by Frank Gehry's office. They did have an online kind of collaborative platform that they called G-Team, which is a little bit similar to this, but it was more of a visualizer. You could dump and compile your 3D models and other documents and visualize them and locally check things out, and create revisions. However, there were certain limitations to the kind of collaborative aspect of that in terms of who had access to what data. So this is another residential tower, Melbourne, St. Kilda. So this process started in Maya. A lot of our work starts with subdivision modeling in Maya and then evolves into Rhino and via Grasshopper or T-splines, right? So in concept design, schematic design, we have a evolution or kind of refinement of the design into its kind of more buildable components. So we have similar strategies in New York. We make a kind of smart component UDF that is one component that's repeatable and that's flexible to adapt to the kind of varying floor-to-floor heights, et cetera, and the widths of the building. So in particular, these kind of C-shaped elements are kind of encapsulating, covering spandrel cover. It's kind of a return, soffit, floor, and guardrail inside there. So this particular video, this is like, most of the videos I'm going to show you are just kind of real time. So how we're working real time on the facade, and the ability that we have to kind of revisit, recall, and analyze data, and work a bit closer and closely to how, let's say, our fabricators and contractors will work. Meaning that a lot of this information gets encapsulated into Excel sheets, right? And a lot of the geometry is controlled. You know, the, let's say, principal design geometry, the length and width and depth of these elements are controlled parametrically in the UDF, or the power copy of the module, and then they're dumped into an Excel sheet, and then they're kind of fine-tuned there. Right? Which is a good mirror of how one works, or how contractors work, particularly facade contractors. As we saw earlier with some of the work that Cristiano showed, is that in the industry, particularly the facade industry, the facade contractors are quite often using CATIA platform of sorts, so that it's a good kind of fit for us and a good reason to practice in and design in the same platform in order to have some continuity of design and fabrication. So in a way, we have smart components. This is, for those of you that have done things like this, is pretty much kind of familiar to you guys, right? So here we are reporting information on, right, the individual panels, their kind of width and their surface area and their principal geometric definition, balustrades, returns and soffits and things like that. And then we're kind of controlling and understanding, you know, the kind of quantities of all the elements that go in to the costing of the building, and at the same time we're able to kind of fluidly adjust our design intent based on detailing and means and methods of builders and contractors. So this is kind of the foundation for kind of how we set up kind of a BIM Level 2+ workflow, where design is the kind of principal driver, and a kind of collaboration or coordination with contractors is an integral part of being able to deliver our design and not hand over the design intent in a traditional route, but also kind of maintain some control of our design intent through later phases of the project. In a way, this is all kind of, this continuity of design makes a lot of sense for what we do in terms of, you know, authoring such complex form, and then being able to actually understand and produce the means of construction and fabrication for these forms, instead of handing over the process to a fabricator and let them reinterpret our design intent. And so this kind of methodology of working has been quite successful, because it also reduces a bit time and waste in the whole process. And as we saw previously on New York, where the contractor was authorized to submit us a fabrication model based on a design intent, and they were not able to rebuild it. And in that case, we would wait a few months for them to take a stab at rebuilding our design, and then we would reject their proposal. And this process dragged on for some time, almost a year, and it became frustrating for kind of both sides, right? So at some point they got kind of behind what we were doing, and we could actually model their fabrication means and the limits of their equipment and engineering much faster than they could, right? So in the end, we kind of delivered a fabrication model without, let's say, so much liability, is that they took our model and essentially would verify it and send it back with a bit of additional information about, you know, subframing, bracketry, et cetera, and buildups that go behind that. So in a way, we reduced a lot of inefficiencies in the process, and we were able to kind of fine-tune and maintain the integrity of the design that we intended to to deliver. So now how does all of this stuff sit on top of the new collaborative environment, right? So we've got quite a bit of experience over the years in parametric modeling and a certain kind of project delivery methodology that is file-based and is a bit quite inefficient. And so exploring how this stuff will sit on top of the 3DEXPERIENCE platform is what we've been researching the last few months or so. And so in this case, we're looking at a kind of a smart wireframe that's taken from, again, like a subdivision model that first started in Maya, then went to T-splines, and then turned into kind of a proper NURBS model. So we're able to kind of have a bit more control over our geometry from kind of the smoothing tools that we use in order to achieve those curves, where we are looking at the interface of metal, sheet metal return, and glass, where we need to kind of maybe control geometry and add radii and things where we have some gaps in our ability to control that geometry when you essentially hit a smoothing button, right? So in this way, the kind of NURBS parametric modeling approach is quite useful. There's no baking required. It's that the geometry is deployed live, and then anybody can essentially open it and push and pull points and evaluate the design per their liking, right? So, yeah, sheet metal. Sheet metal is quite common, obviously within the tool. As we saw earlier in Cristiano's presentation, the history of CATIA with Boeing and the aerospace industry and its ability to kind of control and manipulate sheet metal and produce developable surfaces. So we throw Gaussian curvature analyses on these, and we work closely with the limitations of the metal in order to produce kind of our best fit design intent. Yeah. I'll let this run for a minute or so. So all this functionality we see is kind of maintained in the 3DX platform, and where it's going next is quite curious as to how we can exchange all this information amongst the entire team itself, right? So when we deal with kind of a centralized kind of BIM platform, right? I kind of want to steer away from this idea of BIM for the purposes of what we do, which is because it's more focused on design. So in 3DX, we can actually take these models and we can exchange them between each other, and we can mark them and comment on them and actually, co-author and co-work on a design with one or two or three people simultaneously, which is quite nice, right? So a lot of people are not so familiar with the more of the design tools that are in 3DEXPERIENCE. Right? We've got this particular tool. It's called Imagine and Shape. It's quite a robust subdivision modeler, right? That has connections to all the downstream NURBS modeling capability of the platform itself, with some kind of quick and efficient means of shaping surfaces here. So in lieu of some of the work that we wanted to show today that's not public yet, we've done some kind of quick design studies of how we are working in terms of using subdivision modeling to create, say a kind of a dynamic canopy, right? That can be, exchanged between, let's say Maya and 3DEXPERIENCE, and then develop downstream. Right? So this is a kind of an interesting sample of how one can work. It's not as quick and as fluid as Maya, but it is quite functional, and it is in a way quite efficient. And so we can actually go between two platforms. We can actually go between 3DEXPERIENCE and Maya quite fluidly, exchanging OBJ files. So if the design team, which is primarily working in Maya, has to make revisions to our principal geometry based on some sort of a coordination of systems of structure, et cetera, they can do that, and then we can feed this back in to the 3DEXPERIENCE model to develop other downstream workflows. So in the coming days, I guess Jonathan and the crew will be demonstrating some of these tools. All right. So this has been quite often the focus for us. Design, can't quite stress how important design is to our brand, and us being the authors of these types of shapes, that it's important for us to be able to have complete control over those shapes and be able to communicate how we are able to build these things to fabricators. Yeah, are there many CATIA and 3DX users in here? Does anyone use Imagine and Shape? Those that are working with the platform? A few, yeah, here and there. Yeah, most people are kind of more interested in the BIM aspects of it, but it's pretty interesting to see we have such a range of flexibility with design tools and for BIM stuff and engineering and mechanical engineering and manufacturing. So we can take this shape and then start to work with the collaborative aspects of the platform, which we found quite fun, right? So we do have kind of these chat windows like Facebook or whatnot. So, so Francesca can design something or push and pull, and she can send me a little chat and say, here's my model. You can find it here, so everything's on the cloud. So she gives me a name, and I can take that model and I can open it, or we can both open the model at the same time and review it and look at it and make comments and exchange that information all kind of real time on the platform. It's something that wasn't really happening in the kind of DP and CATIA V5 platform, which is we're more like BIM Level 2. So I think the collaborative aspects of the software are the most exciting for the designers that are working in the office. And it's actually quite fun. It's actually quite fun to be able to have this kind of all-in-one platform. So can you send me a details? So in this case, like here's a surface model. We're going to send it to the technical team, and then the technical team can take that model and create some build-ups downstream, coordinate what's happening with secondary structure, et cetera. If this were to be like, kind of a roof canopy of sorts, right? And apply certain offsets and thicknesses to that, and then begin to develop some, let's say, panelization and knowledgeware over top of this, right? Drawing, even though it's kind of an idea of the future of us getting away from the 2D and the paper stuff, drawing is still quite important, at least in terms of, concept and general arrangement of how we present things as architects too. So creating the drawings within the platform parametrically is quite useful, right? So, these tools are kind of all in one. You don't need to kind of flip-flop between different platforms. And you kind of have live geometries parametrically drawn. So it's everything. It's pretty intuitive, pretty quick. This video is sped up slightly, obviously, but it's straightforward. So once you set everything up, then things are in place for you to kind of reuse that content, downstream as you make modifications to your design intent. And then very simple, kind of exporting it as a file type, DWG, et cetera. Unfortunately, still have to go to AutoCAD once in a while, but hopefully that will end at some point, right? And then exporting as OBJ is Maya interface. It's pretty straightforward, right? It is what it is. So result okay. And interesting that export was made locally, right? So you have to, one could also send that file, online via the 3D drive to someone that's on Maya, but in this case, we just kind of export it locally to bring it in and kind of evaluate the low poly, so now you have it in Maya. And if you want to make some quick deformations to the surface, which Maya does much better at this point than 3DEXPERIENCE, but 3DEXPERIENCE is still quite functional. And then ultimately revise the shape and then bring it back and then continue the kind of downstream workflow. So the idea of kind of unifying these things into one platform is a bit utopian, right? We've been talking about this for decades now, of having one platform that does everything, right? And in the reality of how things are practiced is that there's not one platform. It's that we have to have the flexibility to move between multiple platforms, and we meet people that have different skills and use different platforms, and to be able to communicate design ideas and intents with those people is pretty important, and not necessarily forcing one to use one platform all the time. So a question here we have now for the 3DEXPERIENCE on our architectural platform, unlike the civil projects, is how does it function when it's not the center of the world, right? Can it be productive and useful, as one of many platforms on a delivery system? So as we all know, Revit has quite a strong foothold in most offices, ours included. And it's kind of the document of record for delivering a lot of our larger scale projects. So we often feed information into Revit, right? And very rarely do we model particularly complex geometries natively in Revit. It happens in Maya and stuff like that. And then there's a process of refinement that happens in CATIA or Rhino that is then again fed into Revit again in a more kind of clean geometry type of way. Right. So our exploration here is also how to, let's say, play well with the other softwares and other teammates, right? And in a kind of collaborative environment internally that kind of has some continuity into the process, right? So the part of this process involves the kind of Maya team and the Maya users to become familiar with this tool. So again, we made some quite quick shape modifications going between platforms, and I have regenerated drawings in a few minutes. But this is conceptual. These kind of sketches were put together really quickly yesterday for the purpose of this presentation. But these tools are available now to us in the office, and it's encouraged that people participate in exploring the new technologies that are in the industry, and then in a way kind of using what is understood to be kind of engineering software to promote the designs we do in the office, right? So this is the building space planning app, which I guess is similar to BIM and Revit stuff, where you can create architectural spaces and components and things like that. But again, so this kind of interface with the collaborative part, the 3D instant messaging is quite fun. So someone's gonna, create a new volume, create new spaces. We send messages back and forth saying, hey, I've finished the envelope for the BIM house. Can you import the space allocation, please? And in this case, we have Nellie and Kate kind of simulating how they would swap files back and forth and creating task lists, right? So you actually log in your process of tasks also in the platform, so you don't need to use another third-party platform like Trello or something to organize tasks. You keep it all in one platform. It seems quite useful, right? And then you can set a date on when things expire, and then you just kind of continue with business as usual, right? In this case, this is kind of a kind of co-work session where we see two users in the same model, reviewing the same model, and commenting on the same model, and then making changes to their model and their design, right? Which I find quite useful, and has a lot of potential, like within the office, not just externally with other consultants, et cetera. So again, back to the 3D messaging. I think we all like to text message and message quite a lot, so doing that up between each other is quite useful, and it kind of eliminates some emailing. So now, you know, find the model. Okay, here's your model. We go again. We query the model inside the search bar at the top. You can import some Excel space planning apps, right? Mm-hmm. So again, sleeping, washing, working, kind of all, you know, represented in this kind of one workflow. So there, yeah. The building space planning features, the programming features are quite new. So we're still trying to get a grasp on that. But again, you know, a predominance of our work is done, you know, in Maya, at least for the complex form findings things. And that's kind of where we've been putting our focus for using CATIA over the years, is the more complex geometrical parts of our projects, right? So now there's some opportunity maybe to do some programming internally with the application, and swapping real-time information and planning back and forth. Seems like it could be useful. Yeah. So here, hey, do you have the? We'll take a look at the spaces on story 1, sure, etc. Keeping quite fluid conversation going while in the model. So you know this can happen anywhere, obviously anywhere in the world, anywhere in the office. We have a few different spaces within London, within a few blocks of each other. So being able to kind of swap these things and have these conversations, we use kind of an internal Skype chat. But you know that can be replaced a lot by you know, actually working directly in the model on without having to kind of, you know, share screens, et cetera, and actually work directly in the model between multiple parties. It was quite useful. So we can't really, you know, the implications of this collaborative stuff on top of the 3D modeling seem quite moving towards a direction that could be compatible with how we streamline our kind of communication in the office. And so as you go deeper into the space planning apps and the kind of tasking and collaborative tools, we have this thing called routes and tasks. I believe this is some new tools. So in a way, we kind of envision this could take place of some of the subscription-based software that we use, particularly like on New York here, you see on the right, we used eBuilder, which is a process of cataloging and distributing, you know, submittals and shop drawings, right? Which is also kind of a not so streamlined process. Everybody has to subscribe to one platform. In this case, it was kind of authorized, mandated by the client, and then we would all upload and keep just a log of shop drawings, but they were disconnected from the model. The 3D model wasn't actually there. So why submit a fabrication model and then have your process for review and submittal and approval existing outside the platform? So in this case, you know, that I think it was up to 18 months of construction time to build all the metal. A lot of it had to be stored, and obviously there's a record of everything that was made. And had we this platform back in 2013, I think we could have shaved a lot of time off of that process, right? So in this case, you know, you create what you kind of as a route, it's just kind of a trajectory or kind of an end goal and what you want to achieve, right? And then you assign the users to this kind of route and trajectory, and individually give each one of those users a task to perform. And set an expiration date, right? So this kind of also consolidates what we saw earlier with kind of the tasking, but broadening that into a bigger project in itself online that's connected to the 3D model, which seems quite useful for kind of future endeavors, right? So yeah, without getting into the particulars of all the construction method, but we can see there's a quite involved process here over quite a lot of time that was stored traditionally on, file servers somewhere and disconnected from the process of design and fabrication that was inherent in the 3D model. Right. So yeah, and then again back to the messenger, and then pretty much always going back to the commenting and just talking about the work you've done in the messenger kind of real time. And I was going to end it there and just leave the rest for discussion. Thank you. Any quick questions? Yeah, Armando.
So, one thing that I have, thank you. My question has to do with the collaboration with engineers specifically. Is the model live so that they can be responding to it, for example, structurally or mechanically or in terms of facade? And as the underlying design, the architectural design changes, then the other engineering disciplines also change? Like how fluid is that? Or is there still a frozen model that people have to respond to at various times?
Yeah, good question. Generally, it's a frozen model, right? Because we actually don't want our engineers changing our design so much. And in this case, again, it's not like we didn't have buy-in in a lot of these projects. We don't have buy-in from all the other parties involved in engineers and fabricators into the platform. So we had to demonstrate how this worked to them, and then they bought into the process, but they didn't buy into, let's say, the software, right? And because it was a bit expensive. So it actually worked to our benefit because we actually learned a lot about how they work, and then we were able to incorporate how they worked into how we refine our designs based on what they can build. Yes? Yeah, it's actually a little bit of both. Again, it depends on who you're working with, what the dynamic and the structure of the team is, and who's responsible for what parts of the project, right? So again, we have an array of talented people using all different types of softwares that they're experts in, and being able to kind of work efficiently between those guys is quite crucial. So sometimes we'll have someone do panelization studies or an actual panelization model in Grasshopper, and the principal geometry can be defined, but once the model grows to actually building, let's say, thicknesses of those panels and all these sub-assemblies, it gets too heavy for Grasshopper, right? And at that point, we have a kind of a workflow, a bit of a bidirectional workflow where, we take some Grasshopper inputs, definitions, surface, wireframe, et cetera, plug that into CATIA, and then develop the downstream flow there. Any more? Oh, one more.
When you take the geometry from CATIA and put it into Revit, how much do you take out of it?
That's a good question. I would leave that for some of our Revit specialists. Right? But generally, that's been a kind of an issue. It's not a hiccup in the workflow, which we've got some really talented people around the office that have created some really nice scripting workflows in order to kind of refine and rebuild some of that geometry in some cases to go into Revit. And again, we're not always fabricating out of Revit. I mean, Revit's more of a representational type of thing. We just need to produce our architectural working drawings, et cetera. And so we don't want to get into changing our design geometry so it fits in Revit, but more coming up with a way to produce the drawings and still keep the kind of design authorization of the geometry in CATIA, which is ultimately usually passed to fabrication. Yeah, one more?
Yes, the 3DEXPERIENCE platform is sort of marketed as an end-to-end solution, but obviously you're still one of the early adopters, you're still using lots of other softwares to integrate with that.
Yeah.
Do you see a point where that becomes an end-to-end solution for you? And you wouldn't need to have access to all other software solutions?
Yeah, I think it's a great idea in theory, but in how many places, particularly design offices, practice, and particularly how we practice, is that we have just such a range of people coming with skills and interests from everywhere, and that's kind of crucial to how innovation is done in terms of the office. But to have one platform as an all-in-one solution, it's hard to visualize unless you got, like Cristiano mentioned earlier, everyone buying in at the very beginning.
Is it more of a cultural thing than a limitation on the software?
It's a bit of a cultural thing. I think it's also a design thing. I think we want to extend the life of what we do as designers as far as we can into production and fabrication, right? And to include our designers, we need to include the way in which they work, right? And so there is some potential with the Imagine and Shape and in how we work in this particular office with creating fluid forms through subdivision modeling, right? And it's good because we have a lot of times we may say stay in Maya too long, but in a sense we're keeping our design alive a lot longer than we normally would, and then we're participating in that conversation where we normally wouldn't be. Yeah, Philippe?
Well, as experience, you've seen the kind of development of how it has been in the past to today.
Yeah.
How do you imagine it will be in the future? So what things will you want them to develop? What things are visible that's next?
Yeah. I think this is a move in the right direction, right? Getting away from just the ordinary, let's say banal 3D modeling, but just being in the 3D model all the time. Hence the kind of always going back to the web browser. Every day you're logging in, you're online, and you're collaborating, and you're reaching out, and you're able to touch all parts of the industries in the world that you weren't able to do inside just say the V5 modeler, right? So that's what we're trying to encourage is to move that direction and see what we can bring in. So there's a lot of other components we didn't really show, like we're starting to kind of tinker with the VR stuff, and there's quite a bit of opportunity. So the V5 engine, which is extremely powerful, is just a tiny thing compared to what the new platform's doing with all how it extends one's reach on the cloud. So I think there could be quite a lot of potential there, but I don't know what the end, can't predict the future, but I think there is a good trajectory there that we should probably pay attention to. Yeah, thank you.